Maniac McGee by Jerry Spinelli, Chapter 18. Amanda tried to reason with him. You can't go listen to that old coot. He's goofy. He's always saying stuff like that. You can't go because of something one nutty old coot says. Maniac pointed out that it wasn't the nutty old coot who painted up the front of the house. Amanda laughed. Ha! That's no big deal. It wasn't even paint. If they really meant it, they would have done it in permanent paint. Anyway, don't you know? They did my mother a favor. It gave her a chance to get out the old bucket and do some serious scrubbing. Ever since the kids stopped crayoning up the house, she hasn't known what to do with herself. Now she's happy again. Maniac didn't answer. Amanda didn't understand that most of the hurt he felt was not for himself. The hurt he felt was for her and the rest of the Beale family. She stomped her foot. You gotta stay! I don't gotta do anything. You gotta, you'll starve. Was I starving before I came here? Well, you'll freeze to death in the winter. Your fingers will get so stiff they'll break off like icicles. I'll go somewhere. Somewhere? Like where? The deer pen? I'll be okay. Or maybe you could go over to Prairie Dog Town, huh? How about that, Maniac? And she jabbed him. You could live in a gopher hole. You'd be starving, so that'd be perfect, because then you'd be so skinny you could fit right down there all snugly in those little gopher tunnels. He shrugged. Sounds cozy. This was driving Amanda bonkers. He was acting so different, all glum and wiseacre answers as if he didn't care. Not about anything. Yeah, she sniffed. Well, what you gonna do for a pillow, huh? I know you put my pillow on the floor. I'll use a hibernating gopher. Funny. And the bathroom, huh? Where you gonna go to the bathroom? The bushes, over at McDonald's. There's lots of places. She hated it. An answer for everything. And the scariest part was he was probably right. If anybody could survive on the loose, it'd be this kid who showed up from Hollidaysburg, who slept on floors, who outran dogs. He was making her so mad. She pointed at him and she sneered. Well, I'm going to tell you one thing, buddy boy. You better shut the door on your way out and lock it, because if I get my old room back, I'm not giving it up again. So don't ever come crawling back around here. And she kicked him in the sneakers. You hear? Don't worry, he said flatly. And don't think you're taking any more of my books with you this time either. And you can forget about ever getting a chance to open my Encyclopedia A, which I was almost ready to let you do before you went and started acting all poopy. He said, I'll join the library. She jumped up. Ha! You can't. No? No, you need a library card. Then I'll get one. Ha! You can't get a library card without an address. She regretted it as soon as she said it. His head swung. His eyes met hers. His eyes said, why did you say that? Her eyes couldn't answer. He got up and went out and trotted up the street. Amanda cried. She tore a magazine in half. She punched the sofa. She kicked the easy chair. She kicked Bow Wow. Bow Wow went yelping into the kitchen. See? She yelled at the front door. See what you made me do, Jeffrey McGee? Jeffrey Maniac Crazy Man Bozo McGee? He wasn't back by lunch. He wasn't back by dinner. I'm going looking, Amanda told her worried parents. Nobody tried to stop her. She rode her bike all over the East End, the West End. She even went to Bridgeport, practically got herself killed on the bridge. She never pedaled so much in her life, and she didn't come home till after dark. When her parents headed upstairs to bed, she asked if she could stay up to watch TV. They looked at each other and said, okay. She was nodding off in the middle of some late movie when the door opened, and in he walked. What are you doing up so late? He said. I'm incubating an egg, she said. He shrugged and went upstairs. She closed her eyes and smiled. The next morning, a little kid from 3 blocks away came knocking at the front door. His yo-yo string had a knot as fat as a mushroom. As Amanda watched Maniac tackle the knot, she had an idea. It slithered into her brain. When the little kid left with his string, good as new, she said, "Jeffrey, if I knew of some way that you could make it okay for you to stay, would you?" "What do you mean by okay?" "I mean that even if there's one or two people who aren't too wild about you now, and that's all they really are, that even they would like you, and everybody else who already likes you, they'll like you even more." Purely out of curiosity, Maniac replied, "And how all's that supposed to happen?" Then Amanda told him about Cobble's knot. Chapter 19. If the wonders of the world hadn't stopped at 7, Cobble's knot would have been number 8. Nobody knew how it got there, and as the story goes, the original Mr. Cobble wasn't doing too well with the original Cobble Corners grocery store at the corner of Hector and Birch. In his first 2 weeks, all he sold was some Quaker oats and some penny candy. And then one morning, as he unlocked the front door for business, he saw the knot. It was dangling from the flagpole that hung over the big picture window, the one that said frozen foods in icy blue and white letters. He got out a pair of scissors, and he was about to snip it off when he noticed what an unusual and incredible knot it was. And then he got an idea. He could offer a prize to anybody who untangled the knot. It's about this big, the size of a basketball. He would publicize it. He would call the newspaper. Mr. Cobble would have the winner's picture on the front page, Cobble's Corner store in the background, and business would boom. Well, he went ahead and did it way back when, and if business didn't boom, it must have at least peeped a little, because eons of years later, when Maniac McGee came to town, Cobble's Corner was still there, only now it sold pizza instead of groceries, and the prize was a little different. It had started out being 60 seconds alone with the candy counter. Now, the prize, if you could untie it, was one large pizza per week for 1 whole year, which in time made the knot practically priceless, which is why, after leaving it outside for a year, Mr. Cobble took it down and kept it in a secret place inside the store, and he brought it out only to meet a challenger. If you look at the old pictures in the 2 Mills Times, you'd see that the knot was about the size and shape of a lopsided basketball. It was made of string, but it had more contortions and ins and outs and twists and turns and dips and doodles than the brain of Albert Einstein himself. It had defeated all comers for years, including J.J. Thorndike, who grew up to be a magician, and Fingers Holloway, who grew up to be a pickpocket. A pickpocket is somebody who steals things out of people's pockets. Hardly a week went by without somebody taking a shot at the knot and losing. And each lose added to the glory that awaited somebody who could finally untie it. "So you see," said Amanda, "if you go up there and untie Cobble's knot, which I know you can, you'll get your picture in the newspaper, and you'll be the biggest hero ever around here, and nobody will mess with you then." Maniac listened and thought about it and finally gave a little grin. "Maybe you're just after the pizza, since you know I can't eat it." Amanda screeched, "Jeffrey! The pizza's not the point!" She started to hit him, and he laughed, and he grabbed her wrists, and he said, "Okay, and give it a try." Chapter 20. They brought out the knot, and they hung it from the flagpole. They brought out the official square wooden table for the challenger to stand on, and from the moment Maniac climbed up, you could tell that knot was in big trouble. To the ordinary person, Cobble's knot was about as friendly as a nest of bees, yellow jackets. Besides the tangle itself, there was the weathering of that first year. And when the knot hung outside and became hard as a rock, you could barely make out the individual strands. It was grimy and moldy and crusted over, and here and there a loop stuck out, maybe big enough to stick your pinky through. Pitiful testimony to the challengers who had tried and failed. And there stood Maniac, turning the knot, checking it out. Some say there was a faint grin on his face, kind of playful. as though the knot wasn't his enemy at all, but an old pal just playing a little trick on him. Others say his mouth was more grim than grin, that his eyes lit up like flash bulbs, because he knew he was finally facing a knot that would stand up and fight a worthy opponent. He lifted it in his hands to feel the weight of it. He touched it here, he touched it there, gently, daintily. He scraped a patch of crust off with his fingernail. He laid his fingertip on it as though feeling for a pulse. And only a few people were watching at first, and half of them were Hex Angels, a roving tricycle gang of 4 and 5-year-olds. Do you get the comparison? Tricycle gang, Hex Angels, instead of the motorcycle gang, Hell's Angels. Jerry Spinelli having a little fun there. Most of them had had sneaker lace or yo-yo knots untied by Maniac, and they expected this would only take a couple of seconds longer. And when the seconds became minutes, they started to get antsy, and before 10 minutes had passed, they were zooming off in search of somebody to terrorize. The rest of the spectators watched Maniac poke and tug and pick at the knot. Never a big pull or yank, just his fingertips touching and grazing and poking away like some little bird. "What's he doing?" somebody said. "What's taking him so long?" someone else said. "He gonna do it or not?" someone else said. And after an hour, except for a few more finger-sized loops, all Maniac had to show for his trouble were the flakes of knot crust that covered the table. "He ain't even found the end of the string yet," somebody grumbled, and almost everybody but Amanda took off. Maniac never noticed. He just went on working. And by lunchtime, they were all back, and more kept coming. Not only kids, but grown-ups, too. Black and white. Remember, the store is right on the border between the black neighborhood and the white neighborhood on Hector Street. You see, Cobble's Corner was on Hector, and word was racing through the neighborhoods on both East Side and West Side. What people saw, they didn't believe. The knot had grown and swelled and exploded. It was a frizzy globe. The newspaper the next day described it as a gigantic hairball. Now, except for a packed-in clump at the center, it was practically all loops. You could look through it and see Maniac calmly working on the other side. "He found the end!" somebody gasped, and the corner burst into applause. Meanwhile, inside, Cobbles was selling pizza left and right, not to mention Zeps, a 2 Mills type of hoagie. A Zep is a type of sub, by the way. He was selling steak sandwiches, strombolis, gallons of soda. Mr. Cobble himself came out to offer Maniac some pizza, which Maniac, of course, politely turned down. He did accept an orange soda. And then a little kid whose sneaker laces Maniac had untied many a time handed up to him a 3-pack of Tasty Cake butterscotch crimpets. After polishing off the crimpets, by the way, butterscotch crimpets are amazing. After polishing off the crimpets, Maniac did the last thing anybody expected. He laid down and took a nap. Right there on the table, the knot hanging above him like a small hairy planet, the mob buzzing all around him. Maniac knew what the rest of them didn't. The hardest part was yet to come. He had to find the right routes to untangle the mess, or it would just close up again like a rock and probably stay that way forever. He would need the touch of a surgeon, the alertness of an owl, the cunning of 3 foxes, and the foresight of a grandmaster in chess. To accomplish that, he needed to clear his head, to flush away all distraction, especially the memory of the butterscotch crimpets, which had already hooked him. In exactly 15 minutes, he woke up and started back in. Like some fairy tale tailor, he threaded the end through the maze, dipping and doodling through the openings, the way he squiggled a football through the defense. And as the long August afternoon boiled along, the exploded knot hairball would cave in here, cave in there. It got lumpy, out of shape, and saggy, and the Times photographer made starbursts with his camera. The people munched on Cobble's pizza and spilled across Hector from sidewalk to sidewalk, and they said, "Ooh," and "Ah." And then, around dinner time, a huge roar went up, a volcano of cheers. Cobble's knot was dead. It was undone. It was gone. It was nothing but string. Chapter 21. There were bugles and cap guns and sirens and firecrackers and yeehaw war whoops, and Cobble's Corner was a madhouse. Traffic had to beep an inch through the mob. Kids were crying for autographs. Scraps of paper were fluttering down in a shower of homemade confetti. A beaming Mr. Cobble handed up a certificate to Maniac for the year's worth of large pizzas. Maniac accepted it and said his thanks. The undone knot laid in a coiled heap at Maniac's feet. Mr. Cobble grabbed it. Already people were guessing how long it was. Footnote. It turned out to be 4.5 blocks long. Someone tied it to a stop sign and started walking, and that's how far he got before it gave out. The yelling went on and on, the way yelling does, if only to hear itself. But one person wasn't yelling. Amanda Beale. She was holding one end of the homemade confetti scraps. Gaping at it. And then she was scrambling across the sidewalk in the street, shoving people's legs aside, grabbing more scraps and crying out, "Oh no! Oh no!" And then she was running. Maniac saw. He leaped from the table. He picked up a scrap of the paper. There was printing on it, and the word Africa. He picked up another scrap, and this one had ants. Another one said Aardvark and Aristotle. It was the Encyclopedia A. He followed the scrap paper trail up Hector and down Sycamore all the way to the Beals' front steps. The only thing left of the book was the blue and red cover. It looked something like an empty loose-leaf binder. Side note, can you guess who did this? Yeah, you're probably right. Jerry Spinelli never tells us, but we can figure out it was Mars Bar and his friends. Amanda was hunched over, rocking and squeezing the book to her chest. The cover, anyway. "It was my fault," she sobbed. "I got careless. I left it in the living room. Anybody could look through the window and... She clenched her eyes so tight it was a wonder the tears got out. More than anything, Maniac wanted to hug Amanda and tell her it was going to be okay. He wanted to go inside and be with his family. In his house, in his room, behind his window. But that wasn't the right thing to do. The right thing was to make sure that the Beals didn't get hurt anymore because of him. He couldn't keep letting them pay such a high price for him. He had to go. He turned and headed back up Sycamore. Maybe the man with the can of worms' voice was right. Back to your own kind! Back to your own kind! Maybe he was right. He never got further west than the far curb of Hector Street. And John McNabb and his gang, the white kids, the Cobras, they were there waiting for him, to meet him. They were grinning and leering. Some of them were even hissing. "Yo, baby, we hear you got a little pizza. Come on, bring that prize over here," said one of the Cobras. "Come on back now. Come on back to us, 'cause we missed you. We've been waiting for you." So he turned and he started walking north of Hector, right down the middle of the street, right down the invisible line that divided the East End from the West End. Cars were beeping at him. Drivers were hollering at him. But he never flinched. The Cobras on one side kept right along with him on their side of the street, and so did a bunch of East Enders on their side, and one of them was Mars Bar. Both sides, black and white, were calling at each other and yelling, and then they were cursing at each other. But nobody dared step off the curb. Everybody kept moving north. They were an ugly, snarling, black and white escort for the little kid in the middle. And that's how it went. Between the curbs, smack down the middle of Hector Street, right down the center, Maniac McGee walked. He didn't run, he walked. Right on out of town. And that is the end of part 1.